I put together a video of our trip this summer where we went around the United States, starting in San Diego, going to Ohio to visit Mary Jean and Rich for their 60th wedding anniversary. From there, going on to Boston to see Candy's family, then to Bethesda, Maryland to visit Jenna, Reston to see Max, Richmond to see Kate, and North Carolina to visit some friends, more friends down in South Florida, my cousin in Central Florida, some distant friends in Las Cruces, and some very close friends in Phoenix. Since we were traveling across the United States, we decided to go to Montana to see Glacier, and then up into Alberta, across to Saskatchewan, across the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, Mackinac Island, go down to Holland, Michigan, stop in New York, see the Baseball Hall of Fame, drop down into Savannah, over to Cedar Key, Upper Florida, and then stop in Fredericksburg and see the Columbia River Gorge. So we packed up the car, added some snacks and goodies and maps and that kind of stuff, and took off out of San Diego. Going to see the country, avoiding the freeways as much as possible, and try not to kill each other. Headed north through the hills of Escondido so we could skip the traffic going through LA. We were pretty good, but we missed most of it, but caught some on the north end. Wasn't too bad. We made it through. The idea was to catch I-5 headed north. That's the way out of Southern California. While on I-5, we saw our only accident of the trip, a semi fully engaged in fire. But we were really headed for the San Joaquin Valley, and you get there up California 99. The San Joaquin Valley is known as the breadbasket of the world, the United States, you name it. Endless orchards of almonds, pistachio, English walnuts, oranges, tangerines, lemons, peach. They also grow cotton and tomatoes, grapes, and the grapes are not for wine, but primarily for California raisins. They also raise alfalfa because they run a lot of cattle and sheep up in that area. But we were headed for Fresno, and you see the plywood on the right side. That was pretty typical of what we saw in the small cities we passed through. We stayed downtown because it was very close to their baseball stadium where the Grizzlies, the Fresno Grizzlies, were playing the El Paso Chihuahuas, which are San Diego's AAA team, and you could get a burger, a beer, and fries for $5, so why not, even though it was 102 at the stadium. Next morning we headed east on a meander trip to Mariposa. It's in the foothills of the Yosemites. That's Steinbeck country. Caught a small road, headed north. Went through a lot of little towns up there, Sonora, Angels Camp, Sutter's Creek, places that go back to the Steinbeck kind of days. We ended up at Folsom Prison, and we stopped at Folsom Prison just for my high school principal, Mr. Giesecke, who was quite certain that I would end up there one day. We spent the night in Auburn, California, then headed north up through Shasta, gorgeous up there, into Oregon, the Deschutes National Forest, which quickly thins out, pretty open area, and eventually you hit middle Oregon, and it's just wild plains, not much out there. All the way through Oregon, pretty much the same thing, and eventually you end up at the Columbia River, the same one Lewis and Clark were looking for. This is a mecca for kite surfing. Wind howls up here like mad. We followed the Columbia for to the end of the day and then stopped in Boardman. Showed you this just to look at the trees. This is how windy it was. A lot windier down at the gorge. From there we ended up in the eastern end of Washington State. Again, more plains, but you see mountains in the distance because we are headed for Idaho. In Idaho, you get into the mountains, very picturesque, going through Idaho. Made it over to Montana, and you can see it gets harsher. Taller mountains, you can tell this is cold country. But the real thing we were headed for, wait for it, it's coming quick. Yeah, here it is. Wait for it, wait for it. Yep, Glacier National Park. Ride through Glacier starts on a meandering route right along a small river. This is August. It's running pretty slow. In the spring with snow melt, runs heavy. And then it climbs. This is running to the Sun Highway, and it keeps climbing and climbing. The views up here are absolutely spectacular. But it just keeps climbing some more and eventually starts down the other side. This takes about a good hour, something like that. Never got above maybe 25 miles an hour and really had no desire to go faster because beautiful views and just a bit scary driving. Not too bad though. But eventually you do come out to the other end, and when you do, you hit St. Mary's Lodge. The bad news is no TVs at St. Mary's Lodge, and we had kind of a crummy room. On the good side, though, the views from St. Mary's Lodge are absolutely beautiful looking back at Glacier National Park. The reason why you stop at St. Mary's is when you leave here and head north, you're in Alberta, and the term amber waves of grain comes into play, and it goes on and on and on and on and on. Not totally flat. There are a few rolling kind of hills out there, but pretty much wide open spaces. We stopped in Swift Current, stayed at a, excuse me, a Best Western. Typical of where we stayed. Free breakfast, some good, some less than good, I would say. We broke up the day. About every hour and a half we would stop to rest, shake out our legs, do a potty stop, gas if you need it. We would stop at a 7-Eleven, Love's, Petro, local grocery store, you name it. And of course, Miss Candy would have to have a smoke or two. But most of the time it was on the road, just headed through the plains. This is in Saskatchewan. Still pretty much the same thing, amber waves of grain. But we did make it down to the border right above Minot, North Dakota. They let us back in, stopped for another potty break at a gas station. Had some really good caramel corn there, as a matter of fact. We make it into North Dakota. These are the hills of North Dakota at the upper end. Less agriculture, more ranching in this kind of area. We did end up in Minot. Asked one of the locals where to eat. They said, go to Ebenezer's. Great, really good Irish. Wrong. Avoid Ebenezer's. From Minot headed east back into the plains. Still pretty much the same kind of crop growing area. Do see a little bit more vegetation, a few more trees. We get into Minnesota, and again, you see a little more tree cover. You also see the sky changing, a little more humidity. Roll into Wisconsin, still pretty much the same thing, but we're seeing more trees and a little bit more rolling ground. We let GPS steer us to each motel we stayed at. In this case, pretty funny. It's closed. That's okay. They built another one right behind it. So nothing lost, but it was funny. From there, let's see, probably in Michigan here, where we're again seeing pretty much open area, a lot of tree cover. Around the Upper Peninsula, we're seeing more, a little heavier wooded through the area. We eventually get to Iron Mountain, Michigan, and stay at a really nice mom and pop motel. Nice people. From there, we headed east through the Upper Peninsula, headed for the Great Lakes. But when you're in the Upper Peninsula, you have to stop, try some of the local food. In fact, you have to do that everywhere. But in the Upper Peninsula, it is pasties. I won't tell you what they are. You go find out for yourself. Interesting. Eventually, we do get to the Great Lakes. That is Lake Michigan on the right. We saw this for about an hour. These are the dunes. It was a Sunday afternoon. A lot of people out playing on the dunes on a Sunday afternoon. But we were headed for Mackinac City, where we got a motel with a view of Mackinac Island. But we took the ferry out to check the place out. No cars on Mackinac Island. There is a gorgeous hotel, and it is definitely pinkies up. A little out of our league. We crossed back over and headed for the Mackinac Bridge. Mackinac connects the Upper Peninsula to the rest of Michigan. 5 miles long. And it gets pretty high. This is a shipping lane. Ships are passing underneath all the time. So again, it gets pretty high. And on the day we went through, we actually got up into just kissed the clouds up on the top. But we eventually dropped down and headed into Michigan, headed south for Holland, Michigan, to look at the only operating windmill still grinding corn and grain to this day. And if this looks familiar, it is. We made it to Minster probably 12, 13 days on the road, I don't remember. And just hung out for a while. We were beat. You know you're in the Midwest when you see a John Deere parked in a parking space on the street. From there we headed east again, a little north into Akron, caught some rain. About the only rain we caught during the whole thing. Into Pennsylvania, got a little bit drearier over there, but nothing spectacular. Into New York, we were headed for Cooperstown. And when I say no interstate, this is no interstate. But we made it into Cooperstown, had a good time, saw the Hall of Fame, enjoyed. And from there it was through eastern New York. It's pretty rugged out in this area. We were headed for Watertown, Massachusetts, where Candy's sister Lorraine lives. And we park in front of her house on the left and hang out there. Have some really good Italian deli food. That's what you have when you're in Boston. Back on the road again, headed for Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. Pretty heavy overcast that day, but not a big deal. We were eventually headed for Baltimore. That's where Jenna and Ralph were house sitting. Nice area. Well, obviously we got lost, but we eventually found the two-story they were staying at. There's her red car. Had a good time down there also. But from there we took off, headed for Richmond to see Kate. Kate lives in the, shall we say, the low rent district. Lives in half of a house, this little yellow thing you see on the left. Took some selfies. The only pictures we really took on the trip. We're not picture takers. We're not good about that. But then it was on the road again, headed south to North Carolina, an uneventful trip. And eventually down into Georgia. This is near Savannah. It gets flat down there, passed through some small towns. Pretty much empty on a Sunday afternoon. But we were headed for Savannah. And to get to Savannah, again, you have to cross a bridge. I don't know the name of it, but lots of bridges. Getting across the bridge, you see Savannah out in the afar, and you can see it is not a scenic wonderland. And I was feeling kind of puny, so we didn't do much. We just kind of hung out there for the night and then took off. I won't show you much of Florida. This is central Florida. The rest of it was freeway, uninteresting. This is Lake Placid. This is where my cousin Roger lives. This is where the hurricane went through, and you see debris on the right. We didn't see any major structural damage. Primarily it was carports, things like that took a beating. Cousin Roger lives in a very pristine neighborhood. Don't know the name of it. Didn't have much time, so we hung around there for a little bit, and then we went out to eat. Uh, them in their car hours and hours so that we could go on the trip from there. Give you an idea of the damage. Here's sign damage, yellow sign, the diner sign. That's typical of the damage that we saw down in Florida. Nothing really big. And from there we went up through central Florida, pretty much piney woods up through here, very flat. But we were headed for Cedar Key, one of the lesser known keys. It's in northern Florida. It still looks like Key West probably did 70 years. Sleepy little town, uncommercialized, no Mickey D's, no nothing. Just a quiet little Florida town. It's right on the Gulf of Mexico. We stayed at a nice mom and pop motel. We got in after 6, or we're going to get in after 6. She said, "I'll leave the key in a room for you." Pretty laid back. That's what it kind of looked like from the outside. It had a good view of the Gulf of Mexico, and we did get to see just a wonderful sunset that night. Really nice. Somehow I messed up the dash cam, so we didn't get much headed to Alabama, but we did get to Alabama and stopped in Daphne and had that greatest shrimp and grits I've ever had in my life. From there, didn't see much till we got to Baton Rouge, and guess what? Another bridge. We saw a lot of bridges while we were here. Nothing exciting in Baton Rouge. When you get out west of Baton Rouge, again, you're seeing a lightly forested area. Long ride into Houston, where we did see a great sunset again. This is while we were going out to eat. Very pretty out there. Left Houston the next morning, needed another break. Stopped at a very large truck stop called Buc-ee's. There must have been 30 gassing locations. This is what it looked like inside. It was absolutely huge. From there, headed into the hill country of Texas, headed for the Austin area. And if you're in Texas, one thing that you have to do is you have to stop for some barbecue, and we did. Wasn't the best barbecue I ever had in my life, but hey, it was Texas and it's barbecue. From there we went to Gruene, Texas, Gruene, and the reason why we went to Gruene is not only is it a small little tourist town, very quaint, but it is the home of Gruene Hall, and you'll see it on the left, the white building right there. Gruene Hall is famous because it is the oldest dance hall in Texas. It's still operating. It was a Sunday afternoon, so we went inside and had us a Shiner Bock, listened to a little bit of music, and just enjoyed hill country of Texas. We had to keep moving. We were on our way through the hill country to Fredericksburg, Texas. While we were in Fredericksburg, we stayed at a very nice little hotel right on a river. Another pretty location. And the next morning we were off on our trek through the hill country headed for El Paso. Scenery changes. It gets from kind of rugged and gets into the West Texas plains. And not much out there. Stockton is where we usually stop, but this time we were headed straight through. We needed to get to El Paso. And you know you're getting to El Paso when you see the mountains in the distance. But El Paso was just a pass-through. West of El Paso, get into the harsh desert, and eventually we end up in Sun City, Arizona. We were visiting our friends Jim and Mary while in Sun City. And don't you know, right outside their little condo is a coyote. From there, Phoenix to San Diego, harsh desert. Not much out there. This is on the way to Yuma. And headed to Yuma, you know you're getting close when you see the mountains out in the distance. Got to climb through a few of them. Pretty rugged stuff right in here. Not real high, but always hot in the area. Lots of mountain grades, lots of trucks. Nothing much going on in Yuma. Across the Colorado River, you're in California, and it's harsher desert. Eventually, you have to go through a border patrol station. Quick check to verify we were not hauling any illegals, and then it's back into the desert. This is the Imperial Desert. Absolutely nothing out here, except for the sand dunes. These run for miles and miles and miles. This is a winter paradise for the sand duner kind of guys, the motorcycles and dune buggy kind of people. This goes on for miles. Eventually you get down around El Centro. This is below sea level. It's naturally irrigated down here. Lots of agriculture. Alfalfa, lettuce, cantaloupe, you name it, and they grow it out here. And we go into the Laguna Mountains. We are on our way home. This is getting close. It's getting right into San Diego County. Rolling mountains get up to around 4,000 feet through here. And eventually we get to our home in San Diego. This is on the way. And yes, here we are. And there's the kidnapper van on the left. And we do a big U-ey reversal. And we are home. Pulled it in the driveway, unloaded the vehicle, and called it a trip. The only thing that was left was to clean off 10,000 miles of bugs on the front of the car. We were exhausted. 57 days, 10,000 miles, 28 states, 2 Canadian provinces, 25 motels, 5 private residences, and hundreds of pleasant memories.